Hey, it's Mark Ferguson with Investor More, and today I'm talking about whether it's better to sell a house with tenants in it or vacant. But we're not just going to talk about houses, we're also going to talk about duplexes, multifamily, commercial properties, mixed use, and all of the different types of properties, and whether you'll get more money if you sell them vacant or with tenants. Now, there's a lot of different things to consider when selling houses and if they're occupied or not. So this isn't going to be true for every single situation, but hopefully it'll give you some information on what to consider, what to look for, what to think about when trying to decide if you should sell a house with tenants in it or without anybody in it at all. All right, so I've bought and sold many properties, many different types of properties. This is a house flip we bought sight unseen from a foreclosure auction. Really wasn't in too bad of shape. We did do cash for keys for the occupants, fixed up the house, ended up selling it. Now, this is a single family home in an area zoned for single families, which means at the time at least, you couldn't have more than two unrelated people in this property. So Colorado has since changed their zoning laws, although I'm not sure if that's been implemented everywhere yet, but supposedly you can have as many unrelated people in a house as you want now, no matter what your city's zoning says. That's one of Colorado's recent law changes. But when we sold this house, you could not do that. If it was single family, you could have two unrelated people. Then you have residential medium density, which allows more people, but only a couple of units. You have residential high density, which allows as many people as you want with as many units as you want. There's all kinds of different ways that zoning works, and it's different in every town, every state. So make sure you check with your area what's legal and not legal. So I know a lot of people for a long time were taking single family homes, renting them out to individuals by the bedroom. Well, that's not legal in every single area. In a lot of areas it's fine, but not in every area. And Colorado want to change that to make it legal, which is interesting because ironically it makes housing more expensive, because if you can rent to more people by the bedroom, you usually can get more rent, which means more income, which means the property is valued higher. So we won't get off on that tangent too much, but that's something to consider when selling properties. If they're rented or not rented, is what income are they bringing in, and what will they be worth based on that income versus, say, this single family home that could sell to an owner occupied buyer. So for example, if we were to have rented this house, maybe we could have gotten $2,000 a month in rent at that time. $2,000 a month in rent times 12 months is $24,000 a year. And just doing a real simple gross rent multiplier, maybe at 8%, we could have sold this house for $300,000 based on the income approach. With tenants in there, that's what an investor might expect their return to be to buy this property. Well, we ended up selling this house for more than $400,000. So obviously in that situation, it makes more sense to have the house vacant than occupied. And that's just kind of the simple and easy calculation you do to see where it's better when selling a property. We see a lot of single family homes that are rentals that are put on the market. And by and large, the majority of them will sell for much less than that same house would have sold for if it was vacant. And the reason is owner occupants will often pay more than investors because they don't need to, make a return on their money. They want a house. They want somewhere to live, and rent often doesn't produce enough returns to bring enough high enough value for that. Now, if you live in certain markets, if you have extremely cheap properties and you can get pretty high rent for them, maybe it makes sense to rent them. But again, you have to do the math, figure out what properties would be worth rented, and then figure out what the property is worth vacant. But for single family homes, the majority of them in almost every market is going to be worth more vacant than occupied. So I have sold a number of my single family rentals. They were rented. I thought about selling them. I didn't put them on the market. I didn't let the buyers buy the property and figure out how to get the tenants out, or let an investor buy it for much cheaper. I waited till the lease was up, told the tenants we weren't renewing it. Maybe we did cash for keys and gave them some incentives to move out as well. Then when they moved out, We usually fix up the property a little bit because over time tenants will be a little rough on properties, and just living in a property over time, even owner occupants are rough on properties too. So we fixed it up, sold it at that point, and every one of my houses I sold that way. We waited for it to be vacant. Now this was my Cleveland property. I bought one property in my life out of Colorado. It's a turnkey rental in Cleveland. I bought it for $45,000, sold it for $110,000, 7 years later, which might seem like a good investment, but had problems the whole time with evictions and tenants who wouldn't pay, and Cleveland requiring lead-based paint inspections, even though my house wasn't built before 78. Just lots of craziness going on, bad property managers. But for this video, this is an example of maybe a single family home that at one point was better selling as an investment with tenants inside of it than a single family property. So turnkey rental companies would take single family homes, put tenants in them, put property managers in place, and then they would sell them to out-of-state investors like myself. A lot of times they would do that because they knew they could get more than market value for this house, because out-of-state investors in Colorado would say, oh my gosh, this property's rented for $800 a month. It only cost me $45,000. These are amazing numbers. I can't get these in my market. And if they were to sell this house to an owner occupant, maybe they'd only get $35,000 for it. And then they're paying a real estate agent to do it as well and have commissions. It actually made sense for them to rent it, sell it as a turnkey. But this is a very rare situation where that happens. And maybe, especially in some really low value markets, it might make sense to do that. But again, you want to run the numbers both ways, see what makes sense, and realize that these turnkey companies spend a lot of money on marketing, on finding out-of-state investors, have a whole system set up, and it's not easy to just jump into that game and do that. A lot of them also have reputations for being scammers, not all of them, but being scammers, ripping people off. So that's also something to be careful of if you want to get into that business, your association with other people in that field. So this is one example, and if you live in a market with really cheap houses, which there aren't many of them anymore, but there are some, it might make sense to have a single family rented instead of vacant. Now, this is another property that we're flipping. We had it on the market, actually was under contract, and then just came back on because the buyer's credit had some issues. But this is one where it also might make sense to rent it in certain situations, might not in others, depending on the value and rent. So if we were to sell this house by itself, it's probably worth $400,000. Now, it's a 5 bedroom. Yes, 5 bedroom. If we were to rent this house now, maybe it would rent for we'll say $2,400 a month. Note it rents more for that nicer house I showed in the beginning because we're talking about today's rent, and that other house I sold a few years ago, we're talking about previous rent. So that's the difference. But if we have $2,400 times 12, that's $28,800. Divide that by an 8 gross rent multiplier. It's worth $360,000 as a rental in that range. So it's worth more as a single family home than as a rental. But let's say, well, this house is kind of close to the college. We could rent it to college students for $600 a bedroom. Don't know for sure if you could do that, but this is just in theory. If you have 600 times 5, that's $3,000 a month. Multiply that by 12, that's $36,000 a year. If you divide that by the gross rent multiplier, you have $450,000. Now, if you have a house rented by the bedroom, you've got separate leases, there's a little bit more management involved with that. Maybe you're not quite selling it for as much as that. You're not getting as high of a gross rent multiplier, but maybe you can still get $430,000 for it if you find the right investor. So maybe in this situation, it might make sense to rent it to 5 different people if you can get that much and you're willing to put in the work and deal with that situation. For us, we just would rather sell it vacant and sell the owner occupants, but it's much easier that way. Probably takes less time because there's more owner occupied buyers and investors willing to take that on. So that is our decision here, but I could see going the other route too. And going the other route, you might not have to fix it up quite as nice either. So now might make your neighbors mad because they moved into a single family neighborhood. All of a sudden they thought no more than 2 people could live in a house that are unrelated. Colorado changed the laws. Now they've got 5 people living in here, maybe 6. Who knows? Maybe there's couples moving into bedrooms as well. But again, you didn't make the laws. You didn't change all that up. So I'm not going to say people shouldn't do that. If the law says it's okay, then hey, we kind of have to go by the laws. But this gives another example, kind of an extreme example, of where renting by the bedroom, a single family home, might make it more valuable than selling it as an owner-occupied property to owner-occupants, which is interesting because I know Colorado did not make that law, create that law, so that there would be more rentals. They made that law because they thought it would increase the amount of people who could rent properties and make housing more affordable for people. It actually kind of did the opposite. All right, this is another property that I currently own, and this is a duplex. Now, you've got different kinds of duplexes. You've got side-by-side duplexes where one is unit is right next to the other one. You've got up-down duplexes where one's on the main floor, one's in the basement. And you've got duplexes like this where you've got one house and a separate house on the same lot. Now, how you sell these can go either way too. Now, if you have a duplex, it usually doesn't make sense to have it completely vacant and sell it that way. You can do it. But if you've got at least one unit rented, one unit bringing in rent, that can make a big difference on the value, because an owner-occupant could come in there and say, hey, I'm going to live in one unit, I'm going to rent the other, and that will help me pay for the property. I won't have to make as much money to qualify for the entire loan, so I've got this rent coming in. It can actually make it a much better investment for them, and maybe if they move out at some point in a year or two, they can rent the whole thing and have an income property and start their investing journey. I think it's typically called house hacking when you do this. It's a great way to get started if you want to do it. So the thing to consider if you're selling these properties is if you have everything vacant, there's no income coming in. So that might make them worth a little bit less. However, if you've got them under rented, so let's say market rent is $1,200 and you've got this rented for $800 a month on a long-term lease, that could decrease the value. So you want to make sure it's rented at market rent, or else it could actually decrease the value to have it rented. And that goes for pretty much every rental property, especially single-family homes, multifamily homes. If you have them rented and you're trying to sell them, but they're all below market rent, that makes them much less valuable, because even though some people can say, well, the new investor can go in there, kick tenants out or raise rents, and you're fine. Well, it's not that easy just to kick tenants out with new laws for evictions and leases and different things. And it's not that easy to just raise rents a ton on tenants either. Most people don't want to do that, despite what you might hear. So it is a process. It takes some time, and it's not just a simple thing to do. So with this property, if we were going to sell it, it might make sense to have one unit vacant. We could leave one vacant, and then it appeals to owner-occupants, or possibly an investor. Because if an investor comes along and says, oh, this is a great investment, and they see one's rented, they just have to rent the other one. That's not that big of a deal, and they could probably do pretty decent. You could also rent both units as well and sell it that way and have it all ready to go. And you'd obviously be targeting an investor at that point. If it's all rented at full market rent, you probably get pretty close to what you would get if you're selling to an owner-occupant, and that's something to consider too. But you are limiting your buyer pool just a little bit for those house hackers, although they're a pretty small portion of the market. You won't find too many of them looking to do that. All right, this is one of my 8 plexes, the Ocho. We have lots of fun stories from this property of evictions and different things, which we're seeing right here. It's been pretty calm lately. It's all rented, including all the garages. It has 8 extra garages with it that we rent out separately. But with this property, we've considered selling it. It's not for sale right now. You basically want everything rented. So if you're going to be an owner-occupant house hacking, it has to be with a property that has 4 units or less. You can buy a 4-unit, live in 1 unit, rent the other 3, a 3-unit, 2-unit, do it on a 1 unit, but you can't do it with more than 4 units and still get an owner-occupied loan. So for properties that have more than 5 units, it's usually best to have them all the way occupied. Have them all filled up, all rented, and of course you want to bring in as much rent as you can, so you want to get as close to market rent as you possibly can. We bought this one mostly rented, but it had some issues. I think the previous landlord just stuck a bunch of people in there to get it sold without really checking them out. We bought properties before that had, really low rents We're able to get really good deals on that. We just bought an eightplex like that recently. So if you want to get the most money, you want the property in good shape, rented for the most money it can rent for, and long-term leases. Hopefully the tenants are all paying, and you've got a history of them paying too, because investors who are looking at these properties want to see, the last 12 months of rent coming in, the last 12 months of expenses. They're not just going to take your word for it that it's rented and people pay. So if you can get good tenants that pay on time, keep your expenses down, you're going to get the most money you can for multifamily like this. And a lot of things that we've done in the past to add value is buy properties that are, like I just said, have low rents, need a bunch of work, have tenants who aren't paying, come in there, fix things up, offer cash for keys. Sometimes you're paying tenants to leave. Do evictions if you have to on tenants who aren't paying. It's never fun, but sometimes there's no other resort. And then get good tenants in there. You can really increase the value of a property. So that's multifamily. Here is mixed use. This is another interesting animal to try and figure out what to do. I bought this property that had a liquor store, mini mart, 3 apartments upstairs. 2 of the apartments were rented when I bought it. The liquor store was in operation when I bought it, but it's all sold together. The businesses, everything were all sold together. Now, if you want to get the most money selling a business and real estate, it's usually best to sell them separately. Unless they're just completely tied together, you can't separate them. But I could take this business, and this is what I did, rent it to my entity that bought the property, and that business pays rent. Now, the business makes income, so it makes a profit, so you can sell that business based on the profit it makes. So maybe I could sell the business for $300,000, and it's just, you're still paying rent, but it's got that separate value. And the building is worth actually more than what I bought it for because it's making more money now because the store is paying rent to it. We fixed up some of the apartments, rented them for more. And so the building is worth more than I paid for it. And I've got the value in the business as well that I could sell separately. So if you're thinking about selling mixed use or a property with the business that you own, think about separating them if it makes sense because you'll probably get more money separating the business from the real estate. And you could even keep the business and pay rent and sell the building. Or you could keep the building and sell the business. There's all kinds of different options that you could do there. Now, as far as being vacant or occupied, you want it occupied, right? If it's a mixed-use property, well, I say that, and we sold a mixed-use property that was partially vacant, and that worked out pretty well. So again, every situation is different, but if you've got a good business that pays a lot of rent, you're probably going to make a decent amount and can sell it for more being occupied and rented. For sure, the apartments are going to make the property more valuable if they're rented. You might find some kind of mom and pop business that wants to live upstairs and use the basement or the main floor, as their own business or run the current business. That's going to be pretty rare to find. And even if you have all the units occupied and that's really what they want, these properties are so rare and hard to find, they're probably willing to buy the property and then wait for the tenant to move out or try and offer them cash for keys to get the property that way as well. So usually mixed use are worth more all occupied. I had another mixed use property that had 1 apartment on the side, 1 business on the other side. The apartment was rented, it brought in money. We ended up selling that to an insurance agent who did move his insurance company into there, used that space for his insurance company. Now, thinking back, if I had that space rented at full market rent, it probably still would have sold for about the same amount, maybe even a little more. So I don't think it was a huge advantage to sell it vacant, but it did work out that way. But if it had been rented, I don't think it would have sold for much less. It just, again, appealed to a few more buyers being vacant because you might have a few businesses that want to move in as owner-occupants. So again, I can't say it's 100% better to always have it occupied and rented, but in most cases, I think it is. And again, there's always some outliers, unique properties, different situations where maybe it's better to have one side vacant. And now if you've got triple net leases with big franchises like a Wendy's or something, and we're talking about just a single use tenant, and I know I'm jumping all over the place a little bit, those are almost always better to have occupied as well, just because it's hard to find a fast food place that wants a Wendy's business, right? If you have a super unique commercial property that's set up for one specific business or brand, you want that specific business or brand in there. And if they're not in there, and if that's vacant, it will significantly decrease the value of that property. This is Billy's old place, if people remember the story, and that's my property right there on the left, a commercial property, and we'll talk about that as well as this one here. This is not my property. A guy named Billy lived here. Unfortunately, he passed away, but I met him a few times. We tried to help him out. He was not in a good spot. He sort of lived here, but I don't think he paid rent. It was a weird situation. This commercial property is an absolute mess. But I show it because it's a small commercial property. So there's kind of a difference between different types of commercial properties and whether you want them rented or not. So if you have a small, unique property like this, it might work really well for an owner-occupied commercial buyer, because that exists as well. Someone who owns a business and wants to buy a place for their business. Now, if it's in awful shape like this, it doesn't appeal to a lot of people, and that's why it's still for sale right now. It's been quite a while. But if it's in decent shape, you might be able to get more money selling to an owner-occupant than if you were to rent it. And the same rules apply with income. That might get $1,200 a month in rent, we'll say, times 12, 14.4, we'll do 0.085 for commercial, because sometimes there's more expenses, more taxes in our area. We're assuming it's not triple net. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I have lots of videos on commercial properties, but we can't go into them right now. You're seeing my property right now when I first bought it. That property might be worth $170,000 if it was rented and selling to an investor. I think they've got it for sale for $300,000 right now, which I think is too much. But for an owner-occupant, maybe they're willing to pay $220,000, maybe even $250,000 if it was fixed up, because they can put their business in there. There's not many other options. They're saving money on rent, etc. So for a small commercial property like that, sometimes it makes sense to leave it vacant for an owner user. That can also happen for bigger commercial properties too, but not always. It can get real tricky on that situation, trying to figure out what's best. A lot of it's just luck. Who's looking for properties at that time and what you think they might be worth. So for bigger ones, it's hard to say which way to go. Now for me, this big commercial property you're looking at right here, I bought it for $870,000, I think. Smoking deal. It recently appraised for $1.5 million a couple of years later. Maybe it was 1.4. But the owners had kicked all the tenants out. Everything was rented. It had like 4 units. They were all rented. They kicked them out, left trash everywhere, and thought it would sell better vacant than occupied. I think they're 100% wrong, because this had 4 different units. It would have been hard to find one owner-occupied user who wanted the whole property. Although I rent a lot of it to one tenant now, like I said, you never know what's going to happen. But for this situation, if they had rented everything, had tenants in place, or just kept the tenants there, if they were close to market rent, it probably would have sold for $300,000, $400,000 more, at least that much more, having tenants in there. So for bigger commercial properties, especially multi-unit commercial properties, strip malls, properties with multiple buildings on them, maybe like shop space, flex shop space where you've got multiple units, they're usually going to bring in more money if they're rented. Maybe you could have, it doesn't hurt to have 1 or 2 vacant, but the more you have rented, usually the better off you're going to be, because for those multi-unit commercial properties, it's usually investors buying them. It's pretty rare owner-occupants will buy them. It can happen where they buy, 1 unit to put their business in and rent the others. It can happen, but it's a lot rarer. So for big commercial properties with multiple units especially, it's usually better to have them rented. And if you have huge commercial properties like grocery stores, giant warehouses, they're 60,000 square feet, and maybe it's 1 unit, those can be tricky to rent or sell. You can find yourself in some trouble there. I know of a few properties have been for sale forever. Not forever, that's not possible, but for a long time, because they're so big, they're almost too big. And in those situations, if it was me, and I've actually thought about doing that with some different properties. This is the time when Billy flooded my property because he came in there to get water for his dogs and left my water on. Billy was still an okay guy. But I got distracted. If you have these big, giant properties, one unit, you might be able to go in there and split them up, make them smaller, break them up. That can often attract more tenants who want smaller space. If you have more units and some of them are rented, then you can attract bigger investors who might be interested in buying properties, because there's nothing really scarier than buying a gigantic vacant commercial property that's one unit. That's probably one of the scariest types of properties to buy. I did a video of an old Hewlett-Packard building here in Greeley a while back that had 250,000 square feet. It was vacant for 20 years. They were never able to sell it, never able to rent it. Eventually it got torn down, which was sad because it's such a huge building, pretty cool building. I actually tried to buy it until I realized I was just way over my head and had no idea what I was doing. But I wanted to buy it, split it up, make it into smaller units, but it just would have cost so much money to do it. I wasn't in a position to do that, and would have had to bring in a ton of partners and just beyond what I wanted to do at that time. But because no one else did it, and because it was so huge in one unit, they tore it down. So it was more valuable not being there than being there in that situation. So hopefully that gives you some insights on how to sell properties vacant or occupied. It's not an exact science. There are some situations where either way could work. There are some situations where you think one way will work better, but by the luck of the draw, you find the perfect owner-occupant or investor who wants it a different way. And one thing I didn't really talk about was college rentals too much. That's something else to consider. If you have a college rental that's prime for college students, you either want it rented during the whole school year, or you want it vacant right when it's time to rent properties. The worst thing you can possibly have is having it vacant during the school year when it's not time to rent it. That can really decrease the value. All right. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. We'll have many more videos on my properties, and we're buying new properties all the time and having updates on our current properties as well. Plus, we've got some exciting news going on with the businesses where we're adding machines to one of the laundromats. Well, actually both laundromats, which is kind of in progress right now. Hopefully nothing too crazy happens, but with me, it probably will. So, of course, we'll let you know on that front as well. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. We'll be back soon.